As you may know, the popular show Ed, Edd n Eddy has been running for a long time. However, between October 7, 2003 and October 21, 2003 episode 34 was accidentally released 1 week before it was scheduled to. It was also known to some around the office the primary writer had been sick with the flu, and instead of going on to make episode 34, the show was supposed to replay episode 1. At 5 a.m. Eastern, people reported a very disturbing new episode premiering on Cartoon Network. Some children were unfortunate enough to see it. Apparently the quality of the episode was mediocre when held to the regular standards. Animation was choppy, sound was constricted and very muffled. Reports of a line running up and down, similar to a crappy VHS tape, were received. Scenery was described as overwhelmingly dark and depressing without changing props and other background objects, stormy looking. Characters also behaved oddly. Instead of the normal goofy, hijinks-inspired personalities, viewers complained they seemed extremely agitated, gratuitously hateful toward each other, and constantly about to begin sobbing after the lines. The protagonist also had a very bad lisp, no one knows why, but he spoke with a sexual tone and that further bothered the viewers. I was one of these viewers. Creepypasta Ed, Edd n Eddy episode 34. Creepypasta Ed, Edd n Eddy episode 34. The episode began with Eddie walking down the street with Ed. I noted that Ed was missing. There was an angular shot coming from in front of the two to show them walking toward the viewer. He, Eddie, was wearing the angry look he does when something goes wrong. His eyes were red around the iris. Ed looked absolutely forlorn and practically dragged behind Eddie, tears in his eyes, which were both lazy and looking in opposite outward directions. Kevin, the series antagonist, was riding his bike opposite of the Eds, toward them. The shot became blurry and low moans were heard coming from Eddie before Kevin hit him, which never happened because the screen went to black. The screen then snapped back and Kevin was again headed toward Eddie. The view was so blurry this time all I saw was a green blob headed toward a yellow one. Again, the low moan, only this time it sounded like the microphone was broken and loud static came, greatly overshadowing the moan. A claymation sequence of Double D sleeping in Eddie's bed came up. Honestly, it may have just been the abruptness, but I jumped and shivered. Waking up and getting out of bed, he moved oddly around the circular room, the fast pitter-patter of footsteps being the only audio. The steps sounds were very clear as I was shown a bird's eye of him scampering around the room. There were no visible doors. Ed began screeching, sounded like a fisher cat, as he moved wildly around the cell of the room faster and faster until the screen began blurring again, the purple room's color swallowing a now orange blur. An extreme close-up of Eddie's front door sat in absolute silence for a maddeningly long time, at least 2 minutes of dead silence and a door. Next we see Jimmy and Sarah at a doctor of some sort, probably oral. Jimmy, obstructed in view by a hanging lamp, is crying loudly with Sarah trying to comfort him in an unusually warm fashion. "It hurts, Sarah. It hurts." Suddenly, the door of the room is smashed open by a new character, a dentist. His face wasn't shown because he was tall enough to be out of the shot. Sarah was escorted out of the room, Jimmy was shown. His headgear was mangled, the front bent upward, stretching his lip very high, tearing proportions. The front of his gums was trickling blood, and teeth were missing. The disturbing part was he had lost both arms and legs beforehand apparently, and sat a paraplegic. I almost cried as I came to the conclusion the others had beaten him up and bent his headgear. The camera stayed on his mangled face for a few seconds, still as a picture, silent as ever. Commercials came on. We are instantly assaulted with a very hairy Rolf in his darkened shed fisting the cow repeatedly. The visual loops and gets blurry again as the scene pans out. Naz is reading a magazine on her couch. The quality is now perfect. Eddie is now alone, without Ed. The quality declines worse than before and he is still walking, the sun now lightening the mood somewhat as he smiles and begins running. The door is shown again and we see through Eddie's eyes as he reaches out and opens it. His house is nice and bright, but a very badly played violin is blaring the only audio in this scene as he makes his way through the house. Eddie opens the door to his room. Johnny is shown under Naz's couch cushion as he crawls out on all fours in a comedic way and pops up behind her, still oblivious. I laughed because someone forgot to draw his eyes and I thought of a mole. Suddenly I stopped laughing as he started swallowing her head, still in a cartoonish fashion of course, but this was different. He and she stayed like this until she started kicking and struggling. Johnny held her like this until she went limp. A zoom in on his face revealed extremely small, human eyes. Double D was laying on Eddie's floor, no longer in claymation. The camera showed Eddie's house for the remainder of the episode, about 3 minutes, and the next program began on the spot. I've always loved Cartoon Network. When I was growing up it was my favorite channel to watch. Even today it has some good shows, like Adventure Time and Regular Show. One of the newest shows on the network, The Amazing World of Gumball, is a cute and mildly entertaining show. Not really my cup of tea, it's a little immature, but my little brother seems to like it a lot. One day, I was watching Adult Swim when I realized that I'd been up so late that I hadn't even kept track of the time. It was already 4 a.m. I don't recall ever watching as this late, so I stayed awake to see what would happen when it ended. A little bumper showed up at the bottom of the screen during a commercial break. It said that a special episode of The Amazing World of Gumball was about to come on. I was a little confused about an episode of a very popular, new show coming on this early, but I was bored and decided I would watch it thinking it might come on later in the day so I could spoil it for my brother. Sort of mean, I know. The flashy and energetic intro theme played. Although it was played a little differently than I recall, the music was a little different, and the show's logo wasn't animated. Its colors were done rather sloppily as well, almost like something a little kid would do on a doodle board or a glow board. I ignored it, assuming that it was done just for this special episode. The title of the episode was The Grieving, a sort of sad title, but I didn't really pay too much attention. It began with Gumball, the show's 12-year-old protagonist, standing alone facing a corner of his dimly lit classroom. He looked absolutely miserable, a far cry from the cheerful demeanor he usually had. There was no one else in the room, not even his best friend and adopted brother Darwin the goldfish, and the windows in the room clearly showed the night sky outside. I was really starting to get confused. Why would he be at school at night, and why was he standing in the corner all sad and alone? After about what seemed like a minute of Gumball standing somberly in the corner, the scene suddenly changed. We were in Gumball's house. Once again the scene is silent and a little disquieting. Richard, Gumball's enormous rabbit father, walks in from the kitchen. He looked even more miserable than Gumball had in the previous scene. Richard isn't wearing his usual attire. He's dressed in a fancy black suit, a little uncharacteristic of him, as he's usually a slob. He sighs, and slumps down onto the sofa, and starts sobbing intensely, sounding like someone who had just lost something important. I was starting to get a little creeped out. Where was the silly, fun cartoon that I usually looked forward to watching with my younger brother? This was something completely different. I was beginning to think that this might have been something the creators did as an experiment or something, a test of the animation or sound perhaps, though, it couldn't have been, aside from the opening theme, which was still different from the final shows. The episode had been much quieter than it usually was, only subtle sounds and very little music, and the animation was not anything to write home about either. It was done a bit like an amateur Flash on Newgrounds. The character designs were somewhat sloppy and rushed looking, and the real-life backgrounds used for the show looked different. As confused and somewhat frightened as I was, for some reason, I kept watching it. Poor Richard was still sobbing on the sofa, as the front door opened suddenly, making me jump a bit at such a loud noise, and Gumball's mother Nicole, a blue cat like him, stepped in. Like Richard, she wasn't wearing her usual outfit. For some reason, she was in a black dress and was wearing a pretty black hat to match. Nicole sat down on the couch to comfort her husband, although she was looking a bit saddened herself. By this point Richard's crying had began to get more pained and miserable sounding. This wasn't the normal cartoon crying on the show. This was realistic and almost depressing crying. I almost felt like sobbing myself. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the sad scene at their home ended. As it shifted back to the school, we weren't in Gumball's classroom this time. We were in Principal Brown's office. Nicole and Richard were there, in their usual clothes, looking more normal and happy than they had before, but still slightly worried. Principal Brown, however, looked extremely sad. He quietly and somberly informed them that their children, Anais and Darwin, were not present after lunch earlier that day. They hadn't been seen at all the rest of the day. Nicole was instantly furious at him. She began spouting various insults and calls at him that I don't think would have made it on a more mature program like regular show. I was laughing at this, because it seemed sort of funny for Nicole to flip out in this manner and start swearing like a sailor in a G-rated cartoon. But my outlook soon changed when Principal Brown told her something else after she finally had quieted down. His eyes began to tear up as he informed them that they eventually were found, but they had not been found alive. He then went into graphic and nearly nauseating detail describing how their bodies were found, their parents sitting in utter shock. I could hardly believe what was happening. How could such a cheery and fun kid show be taking such a dark and twisted turn? I was considering turning the television off, but I was too scared to be left in the dark by now, nearly frozen by fear and disturbed intensely at the terrible things that he was saying. Another flashback. The scene was earlier that day, and the animation in this scene was even worse than earlier. I don't remember it very clearly, but I think he began his recollection by saying that the school had called the police department when they first turned up missing, believing that the kids had simply ran off and decided to skip school. They said it was very uncharacteristic of both Darwin and Anais to go skipping school like delinquents. Darwin was a little naive and a bit ditzy, but he was a good kid and wouldn't have even dreamed of doing something like that, and Anais was even less likely to run away. She was a straight-A student, despite being only 4, which also troubled the police, seeing as a defenseless 4-year-old little girl was missing as well as an older boy. The school had been thoroughly checked, so the police started to search the heavily wooded area outside of the school. It took little time for the police to discover the horrifying fate of Anais. In a small clearing outside of the school, Anais's head was found in a small box. You likely would have expected something like that to be shown in the show's cutesy art style, but it was nothing like that at all. Realistic blood covered the box, inside and out, while Anais's head was done in the normal style, but was drenched in blood and some other fluids. Not all of them hers apparently. There was a note in the box, seemingly written in her blood. It was never stated during the episode what exactly was written on the note, but it apparently led to the rest of her remains and Darwin's heavily mutilated corpse. What I remember most about this scene was how out of place it seemed. All the blood and gore from Darwin and Anais's slaughtered and dismembered remains was done in a very realistic and disturbing way. It looked like the scene had been taken from a crime scene photograph done by a professional, not something from a cartoon. The way this scene was animated was different from most of the show as well. You may know that the characters from this series are done in vastly differing animation styles, from flash animation to CGI, and I think that there's even a character done by someone putting their chin upside down to make a face. This particular scene wasn't like anything I had ever seen on the show before. Every little detail on Darwin's face was clearly illustrated. He looked a little like a zombie. His face was very pale and his eyes had been gouged out by someone. Anais fared no better, or what was left of her anyway. She was naked and her stomach had been slit open. Her intestines were strewn around the trees and bushes in the woods, done once again in a very morbid and realistic style. I was feeling very ill by the time this incredibly disturbing flashback had come to an end, so I quickly ran to the bathroom to vomit. I was feeling better after upchucking, so I had realized that I had good timing and had ran to the bathroom during a commercial. It was then I noticed that the show had been running twice as long. It usually ran for 11 minutes. But this episode was running for about 30. By then I was wondering if there was any information on the grieving on IMDb or something, so while the commercials were still playing I looked up some information about this episode on Google. Nothing came up. No information remotely similar to the plot or name of this episode existed anywhere. Now incredibly scared and wondering if anyone else was watching, I quickly dialed my brother Larry and asked him to turn on Cartoon Network and see if he was seeing the same shit that I was. He was pretty mad that I woke him up at this hour, but he's a nice guy and told me he would see for me. I thanked him and stayed on the line as the show came back from commercial break. The scene had thankfully panned away from the horrific sight of the children mutilated and was back to the principal's office. I asked Larry if he saw some cartoon animals talking or crying, since that was what they were doing on my TV. To my surprise, he said that he saw nothing like that. Instead it was a rerun of an old Looney Tunes short. In utter shock, I dropped the phone and ran over to the TV to turn it off, and as hard as I pressed the buttons it would not shut off at all. I tried every single button and none of them did a thing. I tried unplugging the whole thing as well, but nothing worked. The TV stayed on no matter what. Larry had hung up, assuming that I was playing a joke or something, I guess, and I was alone once again. My door was locked from the outside somehow, and the door to my bathroom was now locked as well. It seemed that I had no choice but to call the police, since my other family members were gone at night. It was the reason I could stay up so late to watch Adult Swim in the first place. When I hurriedly dialed the number, I accidentally dropped my cell phone into my cup of Pepsi. I was very scared, and had no choice but to finish the episode. I turned on all the lights in my room and got under the covers, hiding like my little brother does when I make him watch scary movies with me. I had apparently missed a little bit, but Gumball's parents were still talking to Principal Brown, so not that much. Nicole was asking him if Gumball was alright, apparently since she hadn't remembered him when Principal Brown told her what had happened to Darwin and Anais. He looked slightly confused and shocked for a moment, and explained to her that he thought Gumball was out sick today and he had spent the day at home by himself with the stomach bug. Nicole screamed and wailed, while Richard quietly told him, in a very out-of-character voice, that they thought Gumball had got on the bus this morning, but it didn't seem that way. The police were called once again, to search the building and the small forest outside of Elmore Junior High. They had found him in Miss Simeon's classroom, hanging by a noose, with a blood-covered knife behind him and blood covering his clothing. The episode ended with the shot of Gumball's dead body hanging there in the corner fading to black. The credits rolled silently, not like the usual way Cartoon Network annoyingly airs a promo that squishes half the screen. These credits rolled unusually slow and they weren't that fun to watch either. A little creepy, just plain white text scrolling on a black background. I only recognized Ben Bakulat's name, as he was the creator of the show. The rest were people I'd never heard of. The copyright notice at the end said a copyright Cartoon Network Studios, 2001, which was incredibly odd, seeing as the show was new for 2011. After all that was over, the screen went to static for a split second, during which some incredibly creepy and shocking video clips were shown between static intervals. I can still remember them all very clearly. The first was a picture of a person in a plague doctor outfit. Those always scared me for some reason, and the way person in the suit was filmed was just as bad. A red light, something that freaks me out incredibly, was shown over the clip. The next was what seemed like a video being played very quickly, over and over, of a kitten's face being squished by a woman wearing high heels, which was strange because a so-called friend of mine sent me a picture yesterday of a cat being stepped on and killed, similar to the kitten in the video. The last one was the one that disturbed me the most and made me want to both cry and vomit my guts out. It was my little brother, or at least a small child who looked very similar to him, being shot in the face by a person who looked like my father. You could clearly see the child's brains and blood splatter on the wall. I began to sob uncontrollably after that traumatizing clip, so much so that I passed out. When I woke up, my door was unlocked, and my television was turned off. I went to call the police on the home phone in my kitchen and report that I had seen some very disturbing things on TV and that my doors had been locked. When they arrived, they could find nothing like what I remembered from early this morning. My internet history was even cleared. They were angry at me, and just assumed that I had had a bad nightmare, when I was sure I hadn't. Thankfully, one of the officers felt bad for me and took me out to a small diner so I could recollect my thoughts. At the diner, I remembered that my family was out visiting my aunt, and they were supposed to be back by noon or so. It was already 11, so the officer and I drove back only to find a whole squad of police cars and even some government agents at my house. They explained to me that my little brother was missing and that my mother and father were major suspects. I was freaking out, and trying to tell them about the disturbing clip of the boy who looked like my brother being shot in the head, but they wouldn't listen. I stayed with my older brother, Larry, who wouldn't believe me either, still insisting that all he saw was an old Looney Tunes cartoon, and nothing at all creepy or weird. The cops eventually told me that they would contact Turner Broadcasting and tell them about the incident. A representative of Turner Broadcasting came to my cousin's house to talk to me in private about what I had seen and experienced that night. He was very kind, but it all seemed a little like some sort of front. After I could tell him all I remembered, he agreed to play back the day's programming from when the incident with the disturbing Gumball episode had occurred. To my shock, all that was airing at that time was an old Looney Tunes short, nothing more. Nothing less. I hysterically sobbed and moaned that what I had experienced and seen was completely real. But no one listened. Eventually, I discovered that Ben Bacalat had a Twitter account, so I sent a message about the episode and this was the reply I got. One thing. How in the heck did you find that? I never, ever thought I would think about that old shame again. Don't tell anyone this, Sarah. Yes, that's my name. But the amazing world of Gumball goes back further than you know. I used to have a really boring job as a teen, and I sketched little drawings of the Wattersons and friends. The episode you saw was never supposed to be seen by anyone but me and a few friends of mine. It was a very, very awful thing to do, but we made the episode as a joke. A guy from my old job, who everyone hated, had lost a child to a crazed serial killer, who is apparently still out there somewhere. Anyway, we made it so we could make fun of how he came into work usually, crying like a fool, which is why you saw Mr. and Mrs. Watterson cry so much in the episode. I know, I am deeply sorry for what I did, which is why I tried to bury that stupid thing years ago. Literally, I went out into the countryside with my mates and dug a hole and buried it. What I don't get though, is how you described the blood and guts and stuff. We didn't have any scene with Darwin and Anais's bodies being found. All that happens in the episode is the parents are informed of the kids being found dead and them crying like crazy. We didn't even draw anything in the episode like that, at all. We're not that sick. Now, this is my theory. The lunatic who killed the man's child found the tape we buried, watched it, and heavily edited it. Then, he hijacked the local TV station near. I blocked out the name of my city. I'm paranoid enough, and it's a small town, somehow, and got the episode to air on your local Cartoon Network station. Now, why your brother couldn't see it, I have no idea. Why it seems you're the only one who saw it, I have no idea either. Sorry, but I just don't know. Now, for the explanation you have been waiting for, the clips at the end. I don't know, I'm deeply sorry, from the bottom of my heart, but I don't know why those clips were aired. I just don't. I am sorry, I really am. But me and my mates are just the ones who made those scenes with Richard and Nicole crying. That's it. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so deeply sorry. Best wishes, Ben Bacalat and everyone involved with the grieving. I'm sure you've all heard about Ed and Eddie. Well, what you probably didn't know was that it has a pilot, like any other show. But nobody has seen it, so there are rumors going about it on the internet. Well, those rumors are not backed up with any evidence. But what nobody knows that I managed to sneak a viewing of this lost pilot, and it was not pretty. Well, to start off, I know this guy who used to be my friend. He worked at the AKA Cartoon Incorporated. He invited me over for a viewing of the new show, Ed, and Eddie. I accepted his invite and got ready to leave. When I finally got to the Cartoon Network studios, I noticed something odd. The lot was empty. My so-called friend was standing near a sign. He waved hello and I did the same back. I asked him, "Where is everybody?" He responded, "I don't know, but let's see the pilot." So we went inside the studio. I looked abandoned. I started to feel uncomfortable. I wanted to leave. When I turned the door, my friend caught my arm and said, "Where are you going?" "I want to leave," I responded in a shaky voice. He then said, "Please don't leave let's just see the pilot it's only 4 minutes long please." "Okay, then," I said. I still felt somewhat scared, but I brushed it off. We went to the screening room. "Take a seat, friend," he said. I sat down and he rushed over to the front and inserted the tape into the VCR. The episode started with a slightly different intro. The music sounded like 8-bit. Like on an NES. It said, "The Three Men," instead of Ed, and Eddie. The font looked somewhat different. It looked like the animator was in a rush, so he just scribbled the title with pen. The pilot flashed a title card which read, Season 01, Episode 00. The episode finally started. It started with Ed, and Eddie walking down a dark alley. The character looked far off model than in the newer episodes. This was not what the pilot was rumored about. People say that the pilot was originally for Comedy Central and it was young adults in their 20s who try to achieve their life's dreams, but fail constantly. But this is all fake. Ed was pinkish and he wore a cap, Ed was yellow and he wore some white glasses, and Eddie was blue. These were characters that came out in The Adventures of Kung Shu, which was an Ed and Eddie early reel. The three still kept on walking in the dark alley, until the screen twitched and it showed a split-second frame of what appeared to be a squashed head. It made me nauseous. I got up and was about to leave. My friend came and told me to sit down. I punched him and he knocked me out. I don't know how long I was knocked out, but I was tied to a chair. "Now you are going to watch this and like it," he shouted out. I had no other choice but to watch. He set it back and played it. The footage where they were walking in the alley still played. Now it flashed a picture which said, "Where's Ed?" Ed was not there anymore. There was only a pile of organs, but the other two Eds didn't seem to notice. They continued walking. Then it cut to static and a video of two men being decapitated by a chainsaw appears. The quality was very shitty. The video scared my half to death. Then the screen snapped back to Eddie. Now it flashed a picture which said, "Where's EDD?" Ed was not there anymore, but the same pile of organs. Eddie took no notice and continued to walk. Then it cut to a picture of a mutilated thumb. Then it cut back to the pilot. "Where's Eddie?" Eddie was nowhere to be seen, until I spotted his shadow. He was hanging from a tree. The pilot cut to static. I fainted. I woke up in my car. The aka Cartoon Incorporated was not there anymore. It was just a pile of rubble. I think that I will never recuperate from this experience. My friend was never found. I made a recreation of what I saw that day. Video removed. Hello, my name is Norm. I'd like to tell you about a real lost episode that's been known for quite some time, the original version of the Downer, and episode from the amazing world of Gumball. I was unfortunate enough to find the episode, and I am here to share with you all the events of this episode. The beginning. Back in April 2018, I used to be an animator for Cartoon Network. I grew up watching Cartoon Network shows like Dexter's Lab, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Flapjack and more, so I thought working for CN would be my dream job. It truly wasn't. I joined the company in 2013, around the time Teen Titans Go started. For 5 years straight, I saw constant stupid decision after stupid decision made by the company, culminating when they announced the Thundercats reboot. I loved the 2011 show, so I was outraged and ended up getting into a fight with one of the CO directors. Instead of being fired, I was sent to clean out the CN archives. I thought it would be the worst day of my life, but I actually found some cool stuff the studio just wanted to get rid of, like on-air TV show pilots, forgotten shows and more. I kept most of them to leak to the world, but there was one thing I found that I didn't. Near the end of the day, I found a DVD titled, Gumball the Downer Original Version, written crudely in marker. The Downer was a real episode of Gumball from Season 3, and the original draft had been talked about for quite some time. When the day was over, I took it and the rest of my findings home with me. I greeted my son and watched some of the CN stuff with him. Having the bragging rights I worked on his favorite shows was really the only reason I kept working there, along with the good pay. I put the Gumball DVD in front of him and went to my computer to start sharing the archives with the people at the Lost Media Wiki, when about half an hour later my son went to my office. He was pale, and looked like he was on the verge of tears. I asked him what was wrong and he said, "Daddy, is Gumball okay?" I assured him he was alright and had him go to bed as it was a school night. I was worried about what he might have saw, so I decided to watch the DVD for myself. The episode started rather the same, until Gumball wished to be left alone. He tried to get out of bed to make it apparent and paced around the room. He got up on the dresser but started to lose his balance and fell out the open window. The next scene transitioned to a rough storyboard style as the episode was never finished. Gumball went downstairs to find his house empty. I thought that the episode seemed pretty much the same except for the window scene, so I didn't get why they changed the episode. The episode continued on as tried to fake his family being there, as he thought they just went to get some food and he was having a nightmare earlier. But after feeling lonely he decided to go to Banana Joe's house and play video games with him, only to discover the entire town was empty. No one was there. He started getting concerned about this, but ended up reassuring to themselves they're all just taking a vacation. The storyboard started getting more messy after this point. Gumball decided to do things he couldn't do when people were around him, like drive a car poorly, or drink alcohol, which I found weird as this was a kid show that normally didn't show people getting drunk. Eventually the dark starts creeping towards Gumball as he starts getting more depressed. He tries to avoid the darkness but it surrounds him, and traps Gumball in the darkness, with him only being left alone with his thoughts. He tries to get free but it's no use. Eventually, he gets confronted with what happened to him. After he fell out the window he was put into a coma, and his family fell apart. The town ended up abandoned and he's been stuck in that hospital slowly dying. At this point I finally saw why my son was so scared, so I tried to turn off the TV but nothing happened. I put the batteries in and out but it didn't work. Gumball started to react. No, this can't be. My family, the entire town, gone. He started getting more and more upset as I searched through my cupboards looking for batteries. I won't accept this. This won't be how it ends. I just need to use my secret weapon. Begging. He gets on his knees and began to plead. Please. I don't wanna die. I just wanna see my family. All my friends. Banana Joe, Tobias, Carrie, even Alan. I don't care, just bring me back home. Suddenly, the sound of a door opening was heard. Darwin appeared in the darkness. Are you okay, Gumball? I finally got new batteries and returned to the couch but it was changing. The darkness disappeared and Gumball was back in his room. He hugged Darwin, saying he was sorry. He tried to push him away. He went downstairs with Darwin, but the darkness was still there. Gumball just ignored it. The episode ended. The end. I felt a sort of dread after watching that. The show basically said Gumball was stuck in a coma, and never truly showed him waking up. I could see why they didn't settle on this draft of the script. I threw the DVD out as I didn't want that stuff to be seen by another person. I went upstairs and my son was fast asleep, in a much better mood than previously. I went to bed too, trying not to think about what I watched, instead watching Fox to get that out of my head. The following day, I contacted Ben Bokelet in a Discord chat. Oh my god, you found that? I'm very surprised. One thing, how on earth did you find it? I found it in the CN archives. Yeah, we intended for the episode to be like a Garfield comic I read once, but it ended up with some very unfortunate implications, so we rewrote the episode. Me and the storyboard artists have agreed not to reveal the storyboards to the public. It would have ruined the image of the show. May I reveal them myself? Look, I would personally not do it. It's honestly not worth it. I beg you not to reveal it. It's best to just be left alone. Ben Bokelet has left the Discord chat. Almost 4 years later, and I still remember that episode. I now work for Disney as an animator and I find it much better. Nowadays I don't regret not downloading the storyboards and posting them online. as I think it was best to respect Ben's wishes. I don't know what happened to the DVD, but I hope it was destroyed at the dump. If the DVD does exist still, don't watch it. It's not worth your time.